In the middle of a court session, a white cop slapped a 15-year-old black boy across the face, right in front of the judge, the lawyers, and a silent crowd. That boy was Malik Carter. He'd been falsely accused of causing $300 in damage to a school lab, and nobody seemed to care if the charges made sense. Malik didn't fight back. He didn't even flinch, because deep down, he knew who was about to walk through that courtroom door. What happens when the cop who slapped him realizes the boy's mother is a high-ranking FBI agent? Share your thoughts below, then stay with me as we step into the room. They brought him in through the side door, the one reserved for defendants already presumed guilty by the room's silence. Malik Carter was just 15. His wrists were cuffed tightly in front of him, and yet he walked without resistance. Not defiant, not afraid, just quiet. The kind of quiet that unsettled people. The kind that made folks shift in their seats and whisper without knowing why. He had on a faded school uniform shirt, one sleeve torn near the elbow, and his shoes were untied, laces dragging lightly across the old tile floor. But he never looked down. His eyes scanned the courtroom once slowly, like he was memorizing it, not searching for help, not pleading for mercy. Just watching. Watching everyone, watching him. From the prosecution's table, Officer Dean Wallace leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes cold. He muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the public defender beside him to hear, "He already looks guilty." It wasn't a joke. It was a judgment passed before any evidence was ever read. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but the air already felt decided. The whispers were rising, layered with just enough tension to let you know people had made up their minds the moment they saw a young black boy in handcuffs. The bailiff guided Malik to the defense table, sat him down, and removed the cuffs with a quiet click. Malik didn't rub his wrists. He didn't fidget. He folded his hands in his lap and stared ahead as if the entire world wasn't quietly crumbling around him. There was no sign of his mother, no father, no family seated in the gallery. Just a line of unfamiliar faces, court clerks, a few disinterested locals, and a woman in the back row who hadn't taken her eyes off Malik since he entered. She wasn't dressed like the others. She didn't whisper. She just watched. At the defense table, the court-appointed lawyer shuffled through paperwork like he was late for lunch. Not a trial. "We'll try to keep this short," he whispered, not to Malik, but to the court clerk. He hadn't asked Malik how he pleaded. He hadn't asked him anything at all. And Malik hadn't offered. But deep in his shoe, tucked beneath a loose flap of insole, was a voice recorder. The size of a USB stick wrapped in black tape to match the shoe's lining. He could feel it against his foot. It wasn't moving. It wasn't blinking. But it was recording. He clenched his toes for just a second, a signal he'd practiced in case he needed to feel in control. It was subtle. No one would notice. But he felt it. He knew it was there. It reminded him that he wasn't as powerless as they all believed. From his seat, Malik glanced sideways at Wallace. The officer was laughing now, talking low to the bailiff about something irrelevant, some joke that only landed between people who wore the same uniform. Malik didn't blink. He just listened, not because he was scared, because he was waiting for this courtroom to reveal itself one layer at a time. Because Malik Carter hadn't come here today to defend himself. He came to expose something much bigger. The report said Malik Carter deliberately vandalized the science lab, causing $310 in damages. That was the number. Precise cold printed in black ink. But nowhere in that stack of papers was the truth. It started 3 weeks ago. The lab was quiet after school. Malik stayed behind to redo a biology experiment, his own idea. He had finally turned a corner in class. He was proud. He had purpose. He was alone until the door cracked open. Laughter, sneakers squeaking, glass clinking. Malik peered inside. Tyler Salzer, son of District Attorney Richard Salzer, stood in the center of the room. Blonde, cocky, with the kind of confidence that comes from generations of immunity. 2 other white students were with him, baseball jackets, too much cologne, and nothing in their hands but destruction. They weren't subtle. Beakers smashed, chemicals spilled. One of them laughed while sweeping microscopes off the counter with a lacrosse stick. Malik stepped in. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. Tyler turned, eyebrows raised. Relax, Carter. This stuff's ancient. You can't do this, Malik said, voice shaking with disbelief. Tyler looked at his friends. Hear that the janitor's upset? I'm not a janitor, I'm a student. And I'm not gonna let you. Tyler walked right up to him, nose to nose. You didn't see anything, he said flatly. I'm reporting this, Malik shot back. A second later, the fire alarm blared. One of Tyler's friends had yanked it. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. A security officer burst through the door. It was Officer Dean Wallace. Wallace barely looked around, just long enough to see Malik Black, standing in the center of a wrecked room surrounded by white faces pointing fingers. He went off, Tyler said. He freaked out. We tried to stop him. Malik shouted, That's a lie, they did it. I walked in and Wallace slammed him against the wall. Shut your mouth, Wallace growled. You people never learn. Check the cameras, Malik cried. I didn't, but Wallace had already pulled the cuffs. You don't talk in my building unless I say so, he said, dragging Malik out. And right now I say you're guilty. Back in the courtroom, Malik sat silent. The public defender hadn't asked him a single question, just handed him a worn folder and told him to keep his answers short if the judge asks anything. Malik stared down at the cuff marks still fresh on his wrists. The entire room buzzed with quiet judgment. Not one face turned toward him with curiosity, only conclusion. And Tyler, he wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His father, D.A. Richard Salzer, had already made sure the case was clear-cut. No witnesses, no video, just statements. All three white boys had signed the same account, almost word for word. The only voice missing was Malik's. But Malik wasn't dumb. He saw it now, how every time he raised his voice they lowered his value. How every attempt to defend himself was twisted into aggression. How speaking the truth had made him look guilty. He remembered what Wallace hissed at him in the cruiser. Keep that mouth shut. You talk too much and you end up exactly where you belong. So Malik made a choice. Silence. Not because he was afraid, not because he gave up, but because now every word he didn't say was evidence. Every look, every moment of stillness, it all meant something. They wanted noise. He gave them silence. They wanted rage. He gave them stillness. And beneath that stillness, he listened. He watched. He planned. Because somewhere out there, someone was listening too. And when they did finally hear him, it wouldn't be because he screamed. It would be because he never had to. The courtroom fell into recess with the dull clack of the gavel like someone tapping a lid onto a boiling pot. A 10-minute break, the judge said, her voice dry, her eyes never once landing on Malik Carter. People stood, stretched, shuffled toward the hallway, talking about anything but the boy who had just sat through 30 minutes of being accused of a crime he hadn't committed. Malik stayed in his chair. He didn't move. Didn't blink much. His lip was still split from biting it too hard when the prosecutor called him disruptive and entitled. His lawyer hadn't said a word in his defense. That's when Officer Wallace leaned away from the wall. His boots echoed as he crossed the room. Big, heavy steps. He didn't make eye contact with the public defender. Didn't ask permission from the bailiff. Just walked right up to Malik's chair and wrapped a large hand around his thin arm. Come on, Wallace muttered, his voice just above a growl. You and I are going to have a quick word. Malik's lawyer glanced up half a second of awareness and then looked back at his files like whatever was about to happen wasn't his business. The hallway just outside the courtroom was long, pale, and silent except for the buzzing light above. Wallace pushed Malik forward by the shoulder until they were just out of view from the double doors. Malik stood still, his face a quiet stone. He didn't ask questions. He didn't resist. He had learned what happened to boys who asked too much. Wallace closed the distance until they were just inches apart. You think you're clever, Wallace spat, sitting in there playing the poor little victim. Malik said nothing. You've got this smug little look like you're better than the rest of them. Like you know something we don't. He stepped even closer. You think that badge on your mother's chest is going to keep you safe forever? Malik's face didn't twitch, but his heart jumped. That wasn't supposed to be known. No one in that courtroom was supposed to know who his mother really was. Wallace grinned. Yeah, I know. Then, without another word, he lifted his hand and slapped Malik across the face with a full swing of his palm. The sound echoed like a shot. Malik stumbled back a step, hitting the wall behind him. Blood bloomed from the corner of his mouth, thick and bright against his dark skin. He stayed upright. Wallace's chest was rising fast and loud like the sound of someone who wanted a fight and didn't get one. He waited for Malik to cry, or yell, or or flinch, but the boy didn't do any of that. He lifted his chin slowly, eyes steady, and stared directly into Wallace's face with a stillness so quiet it roared. At the far end of the hallway, someone exhaled sharp, startled. A black woman mid-40s stood near the water fountain. Brenda Marshall, janitorial staff for the courthouse. No one important. No badge, no uniform. Just eyes that had seen too many boys like Malik and too many men like Wallace. She didn't speak. She didn't rush forward. She simply lifted the phone that had been recording the entire encounter and let her thumb rest on the save button. Wallace noticed her too late. He stepped back stiffly. His face twitched. "You saw what happened," he barked. He lunged at me. Brenda tilted her head slightly. "That's not what my video shows." Wallace looked at her for a long second, then turned back to Malik. "You're gonna regret today, boy." Malik didn't answer. He reached up, wiped the blood from his chin with his sleeve, then glanced down at his shoe where the hidden recording device pressed lightly against his ankle. He tilted his head and whispered, barely audible, as if speaking into the air. "It started." He crossed it. "What did you say?" Wallace snapped. Malik didn't repeat it. He just stared forward, past Wallace, past the fear, past the sting in his cheek. Then he turned, opened the courtroom doors, and walked back inside. No one looked up. His lawyer was still flipping through papers. The judge hadn't returned yet. Only Brenda followed him silently, taking her seat at the far edge of the gallery. She never said a word. She didn't need to. The truth was already stored digitally permanently in her pocket. Wallace came in a moment later. Slower now. More deliberate. He stood by the courtroom wall, hands behind his back, his face unreadable. But his eyes didn't leave Malik. The judge returned, knocked her gavel once, and called the court back to order. No one mentioned the slap. No one asked about the blood. Malik leaned back in his seat, his breath calm, his hands folded in his lap like nothing had happened at all. But something had, something irreversible. He had been struck, and it had been recorded twice. And from that moment on, Officer Dean Wallace was no longer in control of the narrative. He just didn't know it yet. Malik did. He felt it in the way the courtroom's silence now hummed with potential. He felt it in the way his recording device still pressed gently into his ankle, alive with evidence. He felt it in the heat of Brenda's quiet stare from behind him. Justice hadn't arrived yet, but for the first time it had been invited, and it had witnesses. Outside the courthouse, a black SUV pulled into the loading zone with no fanfare, no flashing lights, and no siren. The engine cut off with a low purr. From the driver's side, a tall black woman stepped out, simple black slacks, navy blouse, flat shoes, and a face so composed it almost looked bored. But her eyes told another story. They were sharp, focused, unblinking. That was Nicole Carter. She didn't move quickly. She didn't have to. As she crossed the parking lot, her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen once, no expression. Inside the building, Brenda was seated in the back hallway, thumb trembling as she tried to upload the video to the cloud. The app froze. Then an error message blinked across her screen. Upload failed. Internal media restriction violation. She frowned. Tried again. Same result. She whispered to herself, "That's not possible." Beside her, a young IT technician in a courthouse vest leaned in. He had been walking past, but stopped when he saw her screen. "That's a government-level firewall," he said under his breath. "You don't get that from a bad Wi-Fi signal." Brenda looked at him. "Can they see what I'm uploading?" He paused. "If the block came from inside our network, yeah. And that message, that's not courthouse protocol. That's federal." Brenda's throat tightened. "Who can do that?" The kid looked around and whispered, "Only someone with override access. Maybe the DA's office." Across the hallway, a heavy oak door creaked open. District Attorney Richard Salzer emerged, flanked by 2 aides and a young man in a navy blazer, his son Tyler. Salzer's face was tense but not panicked. He moved like someone cleaning up a mess he'd cleaned up before. He didn't go into the courtroom. He didn't look at Malik. He went straight to the judge's chamber door, knocked once, and stepped inside without waiting for permission. A few seconds later, muffled voices floated through the hallway. The words were barely audible, but one sentence carried. "Let's wrap this up," Salzer said, voice clipped, controlled. "My son's name is on the line." Back near the front entrance, Nicole Carter's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the message and paused. Wallace struck the kid, it read. Video captured. Source courthouse janitor. Attempt to upload blocked. Suspected override from DA's office. Nicole stared at the screen for 3 seconds. Then she slid the phone back into her pocket. Her voice was so calm it almost felt cold. Not for long, she said. Then she entered the building. Back in the courtroom, Malik sat where he had been all morning. Hands folded, eyes forward, cheeks still red from the slap. His silence was heavier now, heavier than before. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew the game had changed. And he wasn't the only one playing it anymore. Wallace stood near the side door, arms crossed, breathing slower than before, but still watching. He noticed the change in the room's air, how it felt more electric, like a storm creeping in under the courthouse walls. Then he noticed the black woman entering the hallway. Nicole didn't look at anyone. She didn't announce herself. She simply paused at the threshold and scanned the room with surgical precision. Her eyes landed on Wallace for less than a second, just long enough. He looked away first. The courtroom fell into a strange stillness, like something ancient had just entered a reckoning dressed in quiet clothes. Brenda sat up straighter. The IT tech beside her stood completely still. Nicole walked toward the courtroom doors, heels tapping softly. Inside the judge's chamber, the muffled conversation continued. Salzer's voice rising slightly now. Defensive, frustrated, but still cloaked in arrogance. Malik sat motionless. But if anyone had looked close enough, they would have seen it, the faintest movement of his thumb pressing once against his ankle. The recorder was still on. Still listening. He leaned back slightly and exhaled, quiet but steady. For the first time that morning, he wasn't alone anymore. The room they used for holding minors wasn't much larger than a janitor's closet. Gray walls, one narrow bench against the back, a flickering light overhead that hummed loud enough to drown out your own thoughts if you let it. Malik sat on the bench, elbows on knees, fingers shaking as they hovered just above his lap. He wasn't strong here, not anymore. His arms trembled not from cold, but from everything he had tried to hold in. His knees bounced. He was trying not to cry, but the pressure kept pushing up through his chest like grief disguised as gravity. His whisper barely filled the room. It's happening. I'm scared, Mom, but I'm still here. No one answered. Of course they didn't. But he said it anyway because somehow saying it made it feel real. Saying it kept his courage from slipping through his fingers. He looked down at his shoe, then slowly untied it, pulling the laces loose with slow fingers. Inside, tucked beneath the arch, was the tiny recorder. He touched it gently, not turning it off, just feeling it there. Still alive. Still listening. His thumb tapped the mic once, and then his breathing broke. He tried to stop it, but the sob slipped out anyway, one short, raw sound that startled even him. He covered his mouth with his hands, eyes shut tight. The moment cracked something open. Not anger, not vengeance. Grief. Because this wasn't the first time. He saw it again, clear as day, the afternoon Elijah disappeared. Elijah had been his best friend since 3rd grade. Laughed too loud. Wore hoodies no matter the weather. He was the kind of kid who made up raps about cafeteria food and could flip a coin onto his elbow with perfect precision. But last spring he got caught in the hallway during a lockdown drill. White security guard. Confusion. A broken trophy case. A lie that spread faster than the truth. Malik had been there. Not close enough to stop it, but close enough to hear the voices rise. Close enough to hear Elijah yell, "I didn't do anything," before he was shoved to the floor. The next day his locker was cleaned out. No warning, no hearing, no letter sent home. Just a rumor that he'd been transferred to a juvenile facility out of district. Malik had gone to the principal's office every day for 2 weeks, asking what happened. Each time he got the same cold reply, "That matter has been resolved." And eventually the silence around Elijah's name grew so loud that even teachers stopped mentioning him. Let it go. And Malik had. Not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know how to fight back. Elijah had vanished like a chapter ripped out of a book no one ever intended to finish. But today, something had shifted. Today someone had slapped him, not Elijah. Today someone had watched. Today something was recording. He remembered what Elijah said the day before he disappeared. They were sitting on the bleachers after practice, the sky low and gray. Elijah had looked up and said, "They count on nobody seeing. That's how they win." Malik hadn't understood it then. He did now. And as he sat there, hands trembling, eyes burning, something steady and sharp cut through the fear. "This time someone will see," he whispered. He gripped the recorder tight. His fingers, still raw from anxiety, curled around the smooth metal. He wasn't planning revenge. He was preparing for justice. And not just for himself. He laced his shoe back up tight, and even threading the knot as carefully as his nerves would allow. Then he leaned forward, elbows on knees again, and let the silence settle. Not like before, when silence was fear. This silence had purpose. Like the breath a musician takes before the downbeat. Like the stillness before a fuse catches fire. He sat up straighter. "It's not just for me," he said aloud, his voice steadier this time. "It's for Elijah. And all the ones who got disappeared in the silence." The lock on the door clanked open. A deputy stepped inside, not even glancing at him, just muttering the usual. "Court's reconvening. Let's go." Malik stood slowly, and for the first time since this started, his spine straightened without effort. He wasn't walking back into the courtroom just to defend himself. He was walking back to testify. Not with words alone, but with truth sharpened by evidence. His steps echoed down the hallway. Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, just Malik. And though the air still felt heavy, it no longer sat on his chest. It followed behind him, like a shadow finally afraid of its own shape. The courtroom was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that sinks deep into the bones, like everyone already knew the outcome but didn't want to say it out loud. The judge leaned forward, shuffling his papers with the slow precision of someone trying to appear more thorough than he was. His tone was final, impatient. "Unless there's anything else," Judge Howell announced, "this hearing will now move to closing arguments." Malik sat in his chair, still and unreadable. His jaw tight, his eyes forward, his fingers resting just barely over his shoelace. The device in his shoe was still rolling. His court-appointed lawyer shifted in her seat but said nothing. Wallace stood near the prosecution table, arms crossed smug, like he could already feel the victory medal being pinned to his chest. And behind him, District Attorney Salzer gave a small nod, almost invisible, like a silent command. "Wrap it up." Then the doors creaked. No one turned at first, just a sound. One more person walking in late until she spoke. "Don't close anything just yet." Heads turned. The voice was sharp, crisp, and cold. The woman walking in wore no badge on her chest. No visible sign of authority. Just a simple navy blouse, jeans, and boots that struck the courtroom floor like a drum line. Her posture was still composed, but her eyes, they sliced through the air like wire. The judge squinted. "Excuse me." She reached into her back pocket, pulled out a leather wallet, and flipped it open. "Agent Nicole Carter, FBI." Her voice was low, steady. "You're all going to want to pause." Time stalled. The clerk stopped typing. The bailiff stiffened, and Officer Wallace took a single involuntary step back. His mouth slightly open, the color draining from his face. Judge Howell frowned. "FBI, this is a juvenile hearing. I see no grounds." She cut him off. "You don't have to see the grounds, Your Honor. I brought them with me." She reached into her jacket this time, slowly, deliberately, and removed a folded document with a gold seal. She placed it on the table in front of the clerk. "Federal subpoena. Signed by U.S. Magistrate Judge Henley. This court is now part of an ongoing federal investigation into obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and violation of civil rights." The courtroom exploded in gasps. Wallace's voice cracked. "You're his mother." Nicole turned toward him with a calm so quiet it was terrifying. "I'm the mother of a child this system tried to disappear. And I'm also the federal agent who's been listening to every word you've said for the last 3 months. The judge stood. "This is highly irregular. You can't just walk in here and hijack a case." Nicole's eyes didn't leave Wallace, then take it up with Washington. She turned back to the clerk. "Play the clip." The clerk hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't..." Nicole reached into her other pocket and handed her a flash drive. "This contains the synced audio from the hidden recording device carried by the minor Malik Carter, paired with the timestamp from the surveillance hallway camera." DeSalzer stepped forward now, visibly sweating. "That footage is under internal review. You can't just..." Nicole looked at him, unblinking. "You're not in control anymore, Richard." The judge looked completely lost. "Is this even admissible?" Nicole didn't flinch. "You're missing the point. This isn't about admissibility, it's about exposure." Malik looked down at the table. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just breathed one long, slow exhale, as if the walls had finally cracked. Brenda, sitting quietly in the gallery, put a hand to her mouth. She knew that voice. It was the same voice that had told her in private days ago, "Don't release the footage yet. They're being watched too." The video played. There was Wallace's voice, clear as day, angry, condescending, and then the sound a slap, sharp, skin on skin. Malik's breath, quiet, controlled, then a whisper. It started. He crossed it. The room went dead silent. Wallace's face contorted. That recording was... Nicole turned toward him. "Legal. You never checked the kid's shoes. You were too busy enjoying your power." Salzer moved toward the bench. "Your Honor, I must formally object to the interruption of due." Nicole cut in again this time with the final blow. She pulled out a second folder and laid it flat on the judge's bench. Evidence of unauthorized data deletion from the court's public records system originating from an IP registered to your office. We have logs, metadata, and backup retrievals. Your son's name was removed from witness rosters after Malik tried to report the actual events. The reason he was here today wasn't just racial profiling, it was damage control. Salzer went pale. Nicole's voice dropped to a whisper. "You buried the truth to protect your son." The judge leaned back, stunned. What exactly is this hearing now?" Nicole faced the room. "It's now part of a federal civil rights investigation. Any further attempt to move this case forward without review constitutes interference with federal authority." She looked to the bailiff. "Seal the courtroom. No one leaves. Phones down." Wallace tried to move toward the door. A second agent entered from the hallway and blocked his path. Malik finally turned toward his mother. Their eyes met. He didn't cry. He didn't nod. He just stared. And Nicole, for the first time, allowed a single breath of emotion to pass her lips. "You did good," she said. "Now let me finish this." And in that moment, everything changed. Malik wasn't the kid on trial anymore. He was the reason they were finally on record. This courtroom, once tilted so harshly against him, had just been pulled into a storm much bigger than anyone expected. And in the center stood a boy who refused to be broken, and a mother who refused to let injustice walk away clean. The tension hadn't settled. It just changed shape. Now it was quieter, but tighter, like the calm between lightning and thunder. Nicole stood at the front of the courtroom, the folder in her hands thicker than the first. This time, she didn't just address the judge. She turned toward the gallery, toward the people, as if to say, "You've watched enough. Now it's time to see." "There's something you all need to understand," she began, her voice steady, low, almost weary. "What happened to Malik isn't an isolated mistake. It's part of a pattern carefully hidden, willfully ignored, and until now protected." She opened the folder. Over the last 18 months, there have been 8 separate incidents involving Officer Wallace and young black students. 8. All dismissed. All buried under paperwork. All pushed off as behavioral issues, as misunderstandings, or simply erased. She paused, letting the words hang. Each of them, she continued, was labeled a troublemaker. Each incident ended without an internal investigation. And each victim carried a version of the same injury. Jaw fractures, bruised ribs, split lips. Do you know what the common thread was? She lifted a photo. They were all children, black, under 18. Brenda gasped from the gallery. A few others muttered. The judge leaned forward now, no longer defensive, but curious. Unsettled. Nicole continued. 2 of them were expelled. 3 transferred to other counties. 1 family moved out of state. 1 child, Elijah Wren, was placed in a juvenile facility on false drug charges after being caught, defending himself. She turned slightly, her voice growing colder. And the last one, he's sitting right there. Malik didn't flinch. He didn't look away. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, but his eyes were wide open now. Nicole walked toward the evidence screen. With a remote in hand, she projected a document, Internal Affairs Case 77B, suppressed. The words were stamped in red. Below that, Officer A. Wallace, disciplinary review, waived. Every attempt to open these cases was rerouted, delayed, forgotten, until someone got tired of being erased. She turned to the judge. That someone was Malik. The room stilled. Nicole lowered the remote and stepped back. This wasn't a sting. It wasn't entrapment. It was his idea. He came to me after Elijah vanished. He asked to help. I refused. He insisted. So I trained him. I showed him how to record safely, how to catalog names, times, faces. Every move you saw him make in this courtroom, every pause, every silence, It wasn't weakness. It was work. She looked down for a moment, her voice softening. He wasn't just being brave. He was being careful, because he knew if he moved too soon, he wouldn't make it out. Then the door opened again. District Attorney Salzer stepped in, face like thunder. "You used your own son as bait," he barked. "Is that what this has come to? Exploiting a child for a vendetta?" Nicole didn't even blink. "No," she replied. "He volunteered. Because you used your son to destroy others." Gasps rippled across the room. Even Judge Howell's gavel trembled slightly in his hand. Salzer stepped forward, voice hard. "You had no right to do this outside official channels." Nicole looked at him, eyes narrow. "And you had no right to manipulate the judicial system to protect your son." Then came the silence. The kind that isn't empty but full. Full of questions. Full of shame. Full of the weight of something finally cracking. Judge Howell sat motionless, then slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked older now, older than he did 10 minutes ago. He set the glasses down and leaned into his microphone, but his voice didn't come right away. Finally it did. Soft, honest. "What if we were wrong all along?" No one answered. He turned to look at Malik. Not the case file, not the court record, but the boy. The boy who sat through slaps and slurs and silence with nothing but a recorder in his shoe and steel in his spine. And he saw him. For the first time he saw him. Nicole stepped back. Her job was never to break the court. It was to expose what it refused to see. The gallery had gone completely still. Brenda had tears in her eyes now. Even the bailiff looked down at the floor, no longer pretending he had nothing to think about. Nicole closed the folder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture wildly. She didn't need to. Sometimes justice doesn't come with a gavel. It comes with evidence, and courage, and silence used wisely. And just like that, the courtroom wasn't what it was when the day began. It had changed. And it wasn't over yet. It started with a leak. No press release, no official statement. Just a video, shaky, raw, unedited. A hallway outside the courtroom. A boy in handcuffs. A white officer. Then a slap, sharp and sudden, followed by silence. 38 seconds, and by morning it was everywhere. Silent justice. It wasn't the violence alone that sparked something. It was the stillness. The way Malik didn't cry, didn't scream, just looked back, jaw-clenched, blood at the corner of his mouth. By noon, students from across the country were walking out of class. In Boston, veterans stood outside City Hall with handmade signs, "Listen to the quiet ones." In Oakland, teachers paused classes and asked for 38 seconds of silence. Back in Malik's neighborhood, something rare happened. People came out. Not for protest, not for spectacle. They simply gathered. Brenda stood on the corner, live streaming from her phone as the video played against the side of an old church. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched. Quiet, shoulders tight, faces stiff. Then someone stepped up onto the courthouse steps. Pastor Green, a white minister from a nearby town. He held no mic, just his voice. "This isn't about race anymore," he said softly. "This is about who we let speak." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some nodded, a few clapped. "For too long," he said, "we've confused silence with guilt. But Malik showed us silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's all you've got." Inside their home, Malik and Nicole stood by the window. Nicole said, "They're not just here for justice. They're here because you made them listen." Malik didn't respond immediately. Then, almost under his breath, "I didn't shout. But I never stayed quiet." That same afternoon, the police department released a statement. Officer Wallace had been placed under arrest for assault and official misconduct. It wasn't long, but it was loud enough. This time there was no transfer, no desk duty. He was taken out in cuffs. Wallace didn't resist. Not because he felt guilt, but because the power had shifted. For once, it wasn't him being watched. It was him being exposed. His photo, head down, hands behind his back, circulated within the hour. Some outlets blurred Malik's face. Others didn't. And the DA, Richard Salzer, received a sealed notice that afternoon. He was under federal investigation for abuse of power obstruction and civil rights violations. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't even open his blinds. At a local community center, people filled folding chairs and stood along walls. No official speakers, no script, just voices. A teacher said, "We label boys like Malik as troublemakers, but all he did was tell the truth." Then an older woman stood up, her voice trembling. "My grandson hasn't spoken much since last year. A cop shoved him during a search outside school. He shut down. But after seeing Malik, he finally told me. No one clapped, no one moved. They just let the moment sit. Nicole sat in the back, coat still on. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was space. For others, for truth. Malik stood near the door, quiet, taking it in. And in that quiet, he realized something. This wasn't just his fight. He was just the first one willing to stand still long enough to be heard. The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been. The judge hadn't spoken in over a minute. The prosecutor was flipping through his notes with no real purpose, just to avoid looking up. And Malik Carter, 15 slight, still wearing his school uniform, was standing in the center of it all like he didn't even realize the world was staring. But they were. He had just finished testifying, not about the slap, not about the planted accusation, but about what came before all of it, about why he was really there. Nicole sat behind him, not as an FBI agent anymore, not even as his mother, but simply as someone who'd been asked to let her son go through hell and stood beside him while he did. She hadn't planned to speak, but when the judge asked if there was anything more the court needed to hear, she rose slowly. "I didn't bring my son into this," she said, her voice steady but worn. "He brought me in." "You think I coached him, that this was all my plan?" "No, it was his. It was..." Some in the courtroom turned to look at Malik, shocked, but he didn't flinch. Nicole continued. "It was Malik who came to me and said, 'What if I could get inside the system? What if I could record what they do when no one's watching?'" She paused, and I told him he was too young, too soft, too quiet. But he looked at me and said, "That's exactly why they won't see me coming." Gasps. A few heads dropped. Even the stenographer paused. "He volunteered," Nicole said, "because he was tired of watching kids like him disappear. One by one. Quietly. Forgotten." She stepped back, her hands trembling slightly but her face still sharp, unshaken. The judge finally lifted his head. His fingers reached for his glasses and removed them slowly. No gavel, no speech. Just a quiet nod. Then Malik stepped forward again. His hands no longer cuffed his back, straight, voice clear. "You didn't see me as a threat," he said softly, looking directly at Salzer. "Because I was small. Because I didn't fight back. Because I didn't yell." He turned toward Wallace's empty chair. "That's what made me dangerous." Silence. "You thought I was just another scared kid. But scared kids remember. We remember everything. The looks, the words, the weight of being watched and dismissed at the same time." A man in the gallery wiped his eyes. A woman clutched her daughter's hand. "You thought because I kept quiet I didn't matter. But I chose silence, and I used it." He held up the small recording device, the one that had been hidden in his shoe. "This caught everything. Not just what you did to me, but what you've done to others. 8 students, all with names, all with stories." He paused, letting that number settle. "I did this not because I wanted revenge, but because my best friend Elijah didn't get a second chance. He got labeled, relocated, and forgotten. And the day they took him, they took my silence too." Nicole blinked. Her face was still, but her eyes were full. "I'm here," Malik said, "not to destroy this system, but to remind it people like me exist, and we're done being invisible." The judge sat back. No words, just breath. For the first time that day, you could feel it in the air. This wasn't a hearing anymore. This was a reckoning. Reporters were already scribbling. But the room wasn't buzzing with drama. It was hushed with understanding, with awe. The courtroom wasn't broken. It was listening. Malik looked over at the seat where Wallace used to sit, then to Salzer, then to the judge, and then he said, "You don't have to apologize to me. Just stop pretending you didn't know." The judge lowered his head, then slowly nodded again, and something changed, not in the law, but in the room. Because for the first time, the boy they tried to silence had spoken, and nobody could stop hearing him. The gavel didn't slam down with rage or power. It just landed soft, final, and full of weight. A tired judge adjusted his glasses, looked out over the courtroom, and spoke with a voice that was steadier than before. "I am ordering an immediate review of all juvenile convictions in this county over the last 5 years, he said. "Any case involving racial bias, school-based arrests, or charges lacking physical evidence must be re-examined." No one clapped. No one cheered. The room, which had been a place of tension, rage, and fear, suddenly felt like it was holding its breath. Something had shifted. quietly, but deeply. The judge lowered his eyes, almost ashamed. He didn't look at Malik. He didn't need to. He was looking inward now at a version of himself that had followed protocol instead of justice. Nicole didn't smile. She didn't show relief or triumph. She just stood tall, one hand gently placed on her son's shoulder, steadying him, perhaps steadying herself too. Outside the courthouse steps weren't packed with protesters this time. People came not with signs, but with silence. They weren't demanding anything anymore. They were watching, waiting, listening. When Malik and Nicole stepped out, they didn't walk with celebration. They didn't hold hands or raise fists. They simply moved through the crowd like a wind, quiet, unwavering, certain. Then Brenda emerged. She didn't hold up her phone this time. It was tucked away, forgotten for now. She stepped forward, wrapped Malik in a hug, and whispered, "You gave us our voice." Malik didn't reply right away. His eyes searched the faces around him, not looking for approval, not even for recognition, just connection, humanity. And he found it. A child stood nearby, maybe 10 years old, clutching a notebook. Malik walked over, knelt down, and tapped the boy's hand. "Don't stop writing," he said. "Even if no one listens right away. Write anyway." Then the press surged forward. A dozen microphones pushed in his face. The noise returned, but Malik didn't flinch. Instead, he glanced at a camera straight ahead, found his reflection in the lens, and finally spoke. "Justice doesn't always yell," he said quietly. "It whispers, but it never stops." The air shifted again. No one quite knew what to say after that. Nicole looked down at her son, her eyes wet but firm. She didn't need to speak. They had said what needed saying. As they stepped into the street, someone tried to ask another question. Malik didn't turn around. Instead, he offered one final look back at the building where it all happened, not as a symbol of victory but of change. Incomplete, perhaps. Imperfect, but real. The judge remained seated inside, still staring, still thinking, and maybe, just maybe, still listening. Malik and Nicole walked away, not into fame, not into the spotlight, but into something much quieter and far more enduring. They walked into the kind of silence that doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything finally is. And as the courthouse doors creaked shut behind them, the sound that remained wasn't applause. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't even breath. It was the sound of something breaking loose. And if you listened close enough, it was the sound of justice whispering back. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in loud declarations or dramatic victories. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet strength of a young boy and the courage to stand when silence is safer, and in a mother who refuses to let the truth be buried. This story wasn't just about one courtroom. It was about the power of being seen, the cost of staying silent, and the ripple effect that one voice brave enough can create. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video. And if you believe others need to hear it too, share it with someone who might be carrying their own quiet battle. We invite you to subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories, where voices like Malik's are honored, remembered, and passed forward. Your support gives our team the strength to keep telling stories that matter, stories that whisper, until the world finally listens. Thank you for being part of this. Now let's carry the silence with meaning. We'll see you in the next story.